May 1, 2023. The body of Robert Davis, a beloved community leader, was discovered lifeless in his own home. The city of Jackson, Mississippi, was in shock. But what came next was even more chilling: the arrest of William "Polo" Edwards, a man celebrated for his fiery calls for peace and justice. How could the champion of the people now stand accused of murder? William "Polo" Edwards was more than just a radio host in Jackson, Mississippi. He was a voice for the unheard, a man who spent years rallying against corruption, injustice, and violence in the community. His broadcasts, filled with passion and conviction, resonated deeply with his audience, earning him a reputation as a fearless advocate for change. Edwards wasn't afraid to call out those in power, often embroiling himself in heated disputes with local authorities and emerging as a symbol of resilience and accountability. On the other side of the community stood Robert Davis, a man equally revered but in a different way. As the founder of the Better Men's Society, Davis dedicated his life to mentoring young men and fostering a sense of purpose and responsibility. He was a beacon of hope for many, a figure whose quiet strength and unwavering dedication touched countless lives. These two men, both seen as pillars of the community, seemed to stand on common ground, united by their efforts to create a better, safer Jackson. But their shared vision would ultimately be overshadowed by a crime that sent shockwaves through the city. When Robert Davis was found dead under suspicious circumstances, and William Edwards was named as the primary suspect, the story quickly became more than a tragedy. It became a scandal that divided a community and left many questioning how well they truly knew the man they once admired. On May 1, 2023, a quiet neighborhood in Jackson, Mississippi, awoke to chaos. The lifeless body of Robert Davis, a man who had dedicated his life to uplifting the city's youth, was discovered in his home. The news spread quickly, casting a dark shadow over a city already grappling with its share of challenges. Robert Davis wasn't just a community leader, he was a symbol of hope for so many. As the founder of the Better Men's Society, he had worked tirelessly to steer young men away from violence and toward lives of purpose. His death felt like a betrayal of everything he had stood for, and the community was shaken to its core. For many, the initial grief quickly turned into speculation. Who could possibly want to harm a man like Robert Davis? Police launched a thorough investigation, determined to find answers. At first, there was little to go on, no forced entry, no immediate signs of a struggle. But as detectives began piecing together the events of that fateful night, their attention shifted to someone no one could have expected. William "Polo" Edwards, the voice of Jackson, Mississippi. Known for his fiery radio broadcasts and fearless advocacy, Edwards had long been a champion for justice in the eyes of his listeners. His platform wasn't just about entertainment, it was a rallying cry for change. Edwards was the kind of man who could ignite hope in the downtrodden and strike fear into those who thrived on corruption. He had fought against powerful forces, taking on political figures and speaking out against systemic issues that plagued the community. So, when whispers began to circulate that Edwards himself was a suspect in the murder of Robert Davis, the community was thrown into turmoil. How could the man who preached peace and accountability be implicated in such a heinous act? Was it a mistake, a smear campaign orchestrated by those he had made enemies of? Or was there something darker beneath his public persona? The investigation took a dramatic turn when key pieces of evidence began to emerge. Detectives found a connection between Edwards and Davis that wasn't immediately apparent to the public. There were reports of a heated argument between the two just days before the murder, overheard by those close to Davis. Additionally, forensic evidence from the crime scene pointed in Edwards' direction, though specifics were withheld from the media as the case unfolded. As news of Edwards' arrest broke, the reactions were immediate and deeply divided. For some, it felt like a betrayal. How could the man who had inspired so many to believe in justice and peace be capable of such a crime? For others, it was proof that no one, not even a celebrated activist, was above scrutiny. Friends, family members, and listeners who had followed Edwards for years found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about him. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered daily, some chanting for Edwards' release, others demanding justice for Robert Davis. Social media was flooded with heated debates, with people on both sides presenting their arguments. Supporters of Edwards claimed he was being framed, a convenient scapegoat for a system that had always been at odds with his outspoken nature. Meanwhile, Davis's supporters pointed to the mounting evidence and argued that justice was finally being served. The story of William Polo Edwards and Robert Davis had become more than just a local tragedy. It was a lightning rod for conversations about power, influence, and the thin line between hero and villain. As the case headed to trial, the city of Jackson found itself grappling with questions that had no easy answers. Was Edwards truly guilty, or was he another victim of the corruption he had spent years fighting against? And as the community waited for the truth to unfold, one thing became painfully clear: the legacy of both men would be forever changed. The trial of William Polo Edwards captured the attention of not just Jackson, Mississippi, but the entire nation. It was a case steeped in complexities, with every new revelation raising more questions than answers. As prosecutors laid out their evidence, the courtroom became a stage where the lines between truth and perception seemed to blur. Central to the case was a heated confrontation between Edwards and Davis just days before the murder. Witnesses testified to hearing raised voices during a private meeting, though what exactly was said remained unclear. Some claimed it was a dispute over financial matters, while others speculated it was tied to a disagreement over community projects. Whatever the cause, prosecutors argued that this clash planted the seeds for a deadly outcome. Forensic evidence took center stage early in the trial. Authorities revealed that Edwards' fingerprints were found on a glass near the scene of the crime. His defense team was quick to counter, pointing out that Edwards had visited Davis's home many times in the past, given their collaborative work in the community. Could the presence of those prints be explained by an innocent visit days, or even weeks, before the murder? Or was this detail more damning than it first appeared? Then there was the matter of an anonymous tip that led police to Edwards. The caller claimed to have seen him leaving Davis's home on the night of the murder. Yet, when pressed by the defense, the prosecution admitted that the identity of the tipster couldn't be verified. Was this tip a genuine lead, or was someone trying to frame Edwards, taking advantage of his well-known confrontations with Davis? Adding to the uncertainty was the autopsy report, which revealed that Davis had been killed by blunt force trauma. The murder weapon, however, was never recovered. Prosecutors suggested that Edwards may have disposed of it before authorities arrived, but without the weapon, the defense argued there was no concrete link tying their client to the crime. Another key piece of evidence was a series of text messages exchanged between Edwards and Davis in the weeks leading up to the murder. Prosecutors highlighted messages where Edwards expressed frustration with Davis, accusing him of undermining their shared efforts. One text, in particular, stood out: "If you keep this up, there will be consequences." The prosecution argued that this was a veiled threat, but the defense claimed it was merely a figure of speech, taken out of context. As the trial unfolded, witnesses took the stand, each adding a layer of complexity to the case. A neighbor reported seeing a car matching Edwards' vehicle near Davis's home on the night of the murder, but under cross-examination, they admitted they couldn't be entirely certain of the car's make or model. Another witness described hearing what sounded like an argument coming from the house, but when asked for details, their testimony became vague, raising doubts about its reliability. The defense, in turn, presented their own surprises. They introduced character witnesses who described Edwards as a man deeply committed to his community, incapable of such violence. They also pointed out a lack of physical evidence directly linking him to the crime scene: no blood, no clothing fibers, and no signs of a struggle involving Edwards. But perhaps the most shocking moment came when the defense suggested an alternate theory, that someone else, possibly someone with a grudge against Davis or Edwards, had committed the crime. They pointed to Davis's own work with at-risk youth, which sometimes brought him into contact with dangerous individuals. Could someone from Davis's past have sought revenge? As the jury listened to hours of testimony and examined dozens of pieces of evidence, the questions only deepened. What could have motivated William "Polo" Edwards, a man who had spent his life advocating for justice and peace, to commit such a crime? Were there signs leading up to this tragic event that the community had missed? And if Edwards wasn't the killer, who stood to gain from framing him? The lack of definitive answers left many in the courtroom, and across the city, grappling with their own interpretations of the evidence. Every detail, every inconsistency, became a puzzle piece in a case that seemed impossible to fully unravel. As the trial drew closer to its conclusion, one thing was certain: the mystery surrounding the death of Robert Davis and the role of William Edwards would haunt the community for years to come. The trial of William "Polo" Edwards, a man once heralded as a voice for the voiceless, came to a dramatic conclusion after weeks of testimony, arguments, and mounting tension. The proceedings, already charged with public emotion, took an unexpected turn before they even began. Days before the trial was set to start, Edwards dismissed his legal team, announcing his intention to represent himself. This decision, some speculated, was fueled by his confidence in his ability to sway the jury. Others saw it as the desperate move of a man with few options left. Edwards, who had spent years mastering the art of persuasion as a radio host, now stood before the court not as an advocate for the community but as a man fighting for his freedom. During his opening statement, he maintained his innocence, framing the charges against him as a miscarriage of justice and suggesting that he had been targeted for his outspoken criticism of local authorities. His words were passionate, his delivery compelling, but his inexperience in navigating the intricacies of legal strategy soon became apparent. Over the course of the trial, Edwards faced an uphill battle. The prosecution presented a compelling case, weaving together forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and a narrative of escalating tensions between Edwards and Robert Davis. The jury listened as prosecutors replayed text messages exchanged between the two men, emphasizing Edwards' alleged threats. They also highlighted the testimony of a neighbor who claimed to have seen a car resembling Edwards near the crime scene on the night of the murder. Edwards, acting as his own attorney, cross-examined witnesses with a mix of determination and frustration. At times, he appeared to falter, struggling to discredit the evidence presented against him. His questioning of the anonymous tip that led police to his doorstep raised eyebrows, but it failed to provide the breakthrough he needed. The defense he presented was one of plausible doubt, arguing that the lack of concrete physical evidence directly tying him to the crime scene should cast serious doubts on the prosecution's case. After weeks of testimony and arguments, the jury was tasked with deciding Edwards' fate. For 3 days, they deliberated, reviewing the evidence and weighing the credibility of each witness. Meanwhile, the city of Jackson held its breath. Supporters of Edwards hoped for an acquittal, while others believed justice would finally be served. When the jury returned to the courtroom, their verdict was clear: guilty of first-degree murder and guilty of being a felon in possession of a firearm. Edwards stood expressionless as the decision was read, though observers noted a slight tremor in his hands as he clenched the edge of the defense table. The sentencing hearing was swift. Judge Faye Peterson, known for her no-nonsense approach, addressed Edwards directly. She acknowledged his contributions to the community but stated that his actions on the night of the murder had irreparably harmed not only the Davis family but also the people of Jackson. She sentenced him to life in prison for first-degree murder, with no possibility of parole, and an additional 10 years for the firearm charge. Her final words were a sobering reminder of the gravity of the crime. "You were once a beacon of hope for this community, Mr. Edwards, but your choices have left a legacy of pain." The impact of the verdict rippled through Jackson. For some, it was a moment of closure, an assurance that justice had been served. For others, particularly Edwards supporters, it was a day of mourning, as they believed the system had failed a man who had dedicated his life to advocating for the marginalized. The community that Edwards had once sought to unite now seemed fractured. Conversations about the trial dominated radio shows, church gatherings, and community meetings. People debated not just Edwards' guilt but also the broader implications of his downfall. Could his conviction erase the good he had done for the city? Or did it serve as a stark reminder that no one is above the law, regardless of their contributions? In the months following the trial, the Davis family worked to honor Robert's memory, establishing a scholarship in his name to support young leaders in Jackson. Meanwhile, Edwards began serving his sentence in a maximum security prison, continuing to proclaim his innocence from behind bars. He wrote letters to his remaining supporters, calling for a re-examination of the case and urging them not to lose faith in the causes he had championed. The trial and its outcome remain a defining moment in Jackson's history, a story of ambition, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of one tragic night. For a city once united under the ideals of justice and community, the case left lingering questions about trust, leadership, and the fragile nature of public perception. And while the courtroom drama has ended, the debate over William "Polo" Edwards' legacy continues, casting a long shadow over the very community he once vowed to protect. As the case of William "Polo" Edwards comes to a close, the questions it leaves behind are as profound as the trial itself. Was justice truly served, or was there more to the story than the courtroom revealed? How does a community reconcile the downfall of someone who was once its champion? And what does this case say about the complexities of public figures who blur the line between hero and villain? We want to hear from you. Do you believe the evidence presented was enough to justify the verdict? Was there a possibility that the truth lies somewhere in the gray areas of this case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're eager to see how you interpret this dramatic and tragic turn of events.